Okay, we've talked about mixed resolutions. Let's talk about mixed frame rates. So let's look right here. Again, ideally, if you have any control over the scenario, do not mix frame rates. Okay, shoot everything 24 or shoot everything 30 or whatever it is you want to shoot. Don't mix and match because there's not, just like with the mixed resolution, there's not a good solution to this problem. So let's look here. We've got some 24, we've got some 30, and we've got some 60. Um, now, unless you're playing around with slow-mo, you don't really want to mix frame rates. Now, Adobe, so right here I've got my frame rate is 24. Let's put some of this in here, which we know is 30. And Adobe, for the most part, will try its best to take care of this. What's happening, right? So if I have a 24 frame per second sequence and I put 30 frame per second footage in there, Adobe has to take out frames, right? It has to take out 6 frames from the office scene stuff every second to keep it in time with the 24 frames of the sequence. Sometimes you notice it, sometimes you don't. That isn't the position we want to be in if we're making a film. As I said, if we're dealing with archival footage, I'm making some sort of documentary about stuff from the 80s, and I've got 30 frame footage. Look, I'm going to live with it. It's archival and looks crummy anyway. People probably are going to be fine with it. If I can avoid it, that's what I need to do. Now, vice versa, if I have a 30 or 60 frame sequence and I drop in 24 frame footage, Adobe is going to add frames to this, to stretch it out so that it plays back in the same time as the 30 frame clip, and that's going to lead to weird looking stuff. So avoid this problem, because just like with the upscale solution through After Effects for resolution, there's not a great solution that doesn't mess up the speed or potentially introduce sort of screwed up motion that you can use to fix this. Now, if you want to play around with slow motion, that's when you mess around with high speed and low speed. So for example, I've got a 24 frame timeline here. If I drop this 60 frame stuff in here, it'll play and look very 60-ish and not great. So what I'm going to do is go to Modify, Interpret Footage. Okay, so here's my footage. It's at 60, but I'm putting it into a 24 timeline, so I want it to play at 23.976. Say OK. Now when I bring this footage over, slow-mo. And this is not artificial slow-mo where Adobe is adding in frames to make it look slow. This is slow-mo because the frames were already there. I had more than double the frames I needed, right? Now you can do this the way I just did by modifying the clip, or you can just go in and play, right? You can play with speed duration. You just have to make sure you don't, start trying to slow it down beyond what the frames will allow. But here's the problem. It slows the sound down too, right? Which could be cool, but you see the problem of if you accidentally shot in 60 and now you want it to be 24, you can't. If you slow it down, if you modify it, you're getting real slow motion with real slowed down sound. Now, if you want to get into mixed frame rates because you want to play with slow motion, I put a tutorial up on Moodle that dives a little bit more into mixed resolutions in this way for slow-mo purposes. But in general, make sure your frame rate is the same. Don't mix frame rates in timelines. It's just going to lead to trouble unless you're doing slow-mo stuff. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about today is related to ingest, is audio sync. Okay, so you're recording, say you're shooting on your DSLR and you have a Zoom or whatever audio recorder, and you're recording dual system. So the audio is going to that machine, the video is going to your DSLR. Now you bring them into Premiere and you need to sync them up. This is the oldest editor's problem in the book since the 20s, when we first started syncing up recorded audio to picture. This has been something editors have had to deal with. Fortunately, it's gotten so much easier to do that it's really not the drag that it used to be. Now, again, organization is key. And this begins in production. So if you're in charge of shooting this, this is where you want to make sure your time codes you've set, so your zoom is starting at hour 1 and your camera is starting at hour 1 for card 1. You ideally have a slate, right, that's going to help you keep everything organized and help you give shot numbers and take numbers to all these different things, because really syncing isn't tricky. What's tricky is you have double of everything, right, and keeping it all organized. Now here I've got a video clip that was shot on a DSLR, and then I've got the audio for this clip. And I'm going to show you a little bit how to do this, and it's going to look so easy, and it is easy. But part of the reason it's easy is because there's one video clip and one audio clip. But after you shoot, you're going to end up with dozens and dozens and hundreds of clips. Maybe they've been labeled properly, maybe they haven't. And that's the real trick. That's the real trick of syncing, is keeping everything organized in separate bins, labeled, and not getting too mixed up. And for editors, unfortunately, you only have so much control over that. If you're not on set, and they're doing a crummy job and they just dump all this stuff on you, it can be a really difficult and take you some time to sort that out. So let's talk about syncing. There are lots of different ways to sync. If you know, which in this case I happen to know, or you have gone through and you've looked at the slates and you've matched everything up, if you know that this video clip and this audio clip go together, the easiest way to do this is to simply select both, right-click, merge clips. Now I could rename it here, or I can just leave it as the same name but with merged, and then I can sync it using audio, which basically means Adobe is going to compare the audio waveforms from each source and line them up, which works very well. You could use timecode if you are working with a sound recordist who's syncing up their timecode with you. At this point, you're probably more likely to use audio until you work with a professional sound recordist, right? So we'll say audio, okay, it's thinking, kablam. Now I'm going to create a new sequence from this clip. So there is my merged clip, right? It looks just like the others, it just says merged. And when I go over here, here in blue is the original video clip with the crummy camera audio. And then below in green is the audio file off the Zoom recorder. And you can see that the Zoom recorder actually started before the camera started, which is typical. Okay. Here the video comes in.
I can't, it's close focus. Yeah. Now hit the slate. Touch this.
Right? Okay. Everything looks in sync. Now, obviously what I would do is I would get rid of this camera audio so that it sounds.
Keep rolling. There's a knock on the door.
It's unlocked.
So that's our clean audio. Here is
Next scene, scene 4. Keep rolling. There's a knock on the door.
It's unlocked.
Okay, and I would either get rid of or mute, depending on what you want to do. If you wanted to keep it around for later, maybe you wanted to mix it in as sort of atmosphere or something. But that's the ideal scenario where you're bringing stuff in and you know the clips that are supposed to line up. Now let's imagine a non-ideal scenario where you don't really know, or there's no slate. There are other ways to sync, and there are ways you can do it in the timeline. So let me bring in. So here's the audio, and here's the video, but they're not synced. What I can do is I can select them both, right-click, synchronize audio. Okay, boop, and I end up with the same results. Okay, I get the same results here. Now the merged clip is easier because right now these are synced, but they're just in the timeline. A merged clip is out here that now I can, put markers and label and do all the good stuff we did when we were subclipping. This is in a timeline and isn't, as useful to me. Now, I put an additional tutorial that I found online going into more depth on different ways to sync and why you would do it. This semester, well, depending on your final project, you probably aren't going to need to do this, but so many of you are shooting with DSLRs. Getting familiar with these two options and getting organized in how you're shooting is super important and will save you so much time. Okay, so that's our discussion on importing, ingesting media and some of the issues you deal with that. If there are things you have questions about, shoot me an email, come to office hours. If there are things I haven't addressed, if you're like, but Professor Gould, I've run into this problem, what do I do about that? Let me know. I'm happy to address any questions that you have. In the lectures, I'm trying to cover a broad spectrum of things to anticipate what you're going to run into. But there's always things that get overlooked that we can dive into. All right, good luck finishing your edit, and I look forward to seeing your work and stuff on forums on Moodle.